Welcome back to 420 Chief. Today, we've got a heavy hitter on the show, a brother in arms, a leader, and one of, if not the most influential veterans in the entire cannabis industry. Jason Ambrosino went from serving the country in uniform to building one of the fastest growing cannabis manufacturing companies in America. His company, one of them, Veterans Holdings Inc., hit number 125 on the Inc. 5000 with nearly 3,000% growth and operating almost 50,000 square feet of production, all while staying true to his mission and values he learned as a soldier. This is the definition of a veteran's grit, discipline, and execution. Today, we're talking about his journey from soldier to CEO and how he built an empire in one of the toughest industries in the country, what he's doing right now for veterans, and his thoughts on the current hemp ban. A ban that could impact every veteran who relies on plant medicine to survive. This isn't a business conversation. This is about leadership, healing, purpose, and fighting for something bigger than ourselves. So buckle up as I welcome Jason. How are you today,
Yeah,
brother?
thank you so much for having me. Doing well. Looking forward to this conversation.
I am as well. I read about you last year. I was doing a Google search on veterans in the industry, just to get stories out there. Because on this podcast, what it's really all about is getting veterans and their stories of healing out, so that other veterans can find out about this. And now, even more than ever, not just veterans, but the politicians that work for us. I feel it's important that they hear the stories of those that they're working for. And it's not just a drug, it's not just an intoxicating thing, but it's actually medicine. And so when you accepted my request, I was super duper excited to have a conversation with you. What you've been through, what got you there, and how this has all helped you. So I'm going to dive right in and say, Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself pre service?
Sure. I grew up in rural America in upstate New York. I actually grew up in the community that we built our infrastructure here in Fulton County, New York, Gloversville, New York. Mayfield's where I grew up. It was a small lakeside community. It was during the time of dare and misinformation, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah, so I graduated high school, and I think at that time I had really never touched cannabis. Maybe once at a party, and but definitely was more on the alcohol side of things, like most all of us were. And I believed a lot of the lies that were told to me. And I ended up going to a military college, so not really any exposure to anything there except for more alcohol, of course. And then I graduated from Norwich, and I became an officer in the Army, and I served for 10 years, and then I retired in 2014. I was in OIF 0507, so Global War on Terror, combat veteran. I was with the 4th Infantry Division at the time, 110 Cavalry, and I was with combat units for most of my career up until right for a couple years before I graduate or before I retired, where they sent me to change functional areas. So it became involved in contract and acquisitions. It was basically the business arm of the Army. Sent me to a lot of schools, sent me to get my MBA. It was actually quite great, but it didn't help me too much for the promotion side of thing either. I mean, I was already hurt, so that big cut came where they got rid of almost all of our year group, all but 30%, and
Wow.
it was time. It was time to get out. So I dropped my retirement back. I wasn't about to let them, push me out that way. I knew that I was hurt, and I had the evidence to prove it. So we went that route, and I was lucky enough to get my 100% service disabled rating, which really is has given me the freedom to do some of the things that I was able to do. But we all are kind of damaged when we go through combat. It's just human nature. I don't care what you did. Humans aren't supposed to experience that. We just aren't built for it. And I don't care. I don't care who you are. Like it has an effect on your soul over time, and not to mention the fact of how addictive it is. That's why so many of our brothers in arms, sisters in arms now, they end up in a situation where they end up with spend time in combat, real true fighting combat, and that you see these are the same guys who they beg for deployments over and over and over again, because anybody who's been there knows that it is one beast of an addictive drug. It
That's
it, it
the thing.
really is.
I'm
You know.
mobilized. I remember the last mobilization I went on. I went to Kuwait to do a boat ops, and there was a guy there that it was his 6th, so back to back to back 6 times mobilization, and he didn't wanna leave. He was said he would stay there until they kicked him
Hmm.
out, and so many of the guys that I went with would jump from one unit to the next to try to just stay mobilized. So what you're saying is 1,000,000% true. We all bitched and complained while we were mob, but then it's like when you're back, it's like, "I'm ready to go again," and people would honestly just look and just jump from unit to unit to stay
Hmm.
mob.
Yeah, and then we get back home, or we get all used up. You get that mandatory retirement because you can't carry the ruck anymore, or whatever else might be wrong with you, because you're all used up, man. Every year at combat's 10 years of age, as far as I'm concerned. And you get back into that civilian world, and you go and you sit down in that office job, and you feel like a worthless piece of crap because nobody appreciates what you just did, and you're like, how did I go from like life and limb running operations where people's lives depend on it, and now I'm like filing report for somebody so they don't get in trouble and get to go home early on a Friday.
Right, and the
It's
system will
quite,
go down and
yeah.
everybody freaks out like it's the end of the world, and you're like, "Nobody's dying over here. It's
Hmm.
not that
Yeah.
serious." Yeah.
I think that's really where the hardest transition comes in. We all go through the what else. What's going with that is that, of course, there's PTSD remnants from when you've gone through that. But even when it's time for you to separate, especially if you were somebody that was combat arms or went through a lot of that type of thing, and then you're separating from this family, and it's like the only thing especially if you've been there for 10 plus years, if you've been there for 20 years, a full 30 years, whatever it is. I mean, you just look like sergeant majors and generals that retire don't fare very well once they retire. If you look at the data, it's pretty bad. The thing is like they're used up and they get out and they feel like useless, hopeless. Like, where did my life go? Who am I? And I think every veteran, when they've separated it, goes through this experience, and the only other person that understands it is another veteran, and we don't even like to talk about it. Like, we just, that every once in a while you'll get so down, and like your battle buddy's like, oh, somebody just put us a message on Facebook that's questionable, we better get involved, right? But like, some of those guys are already so deep because we just are so resistant to kind of talk about that. But I think all of us veterans go through it, and I think I was going through it when I got out, and I went and I, started, and again, I was injured, and I started working for my family's company, and I didn't really like how I was performing for them. I was showing up late. I was on 7 different medications from the VA from all this stuff that was supposedly wrong with me, and it turned me into a walking zombie. Right? I couldn't function. I certainly couldn't feel proud about myself. There's nothing proud about like barely being able to sleep throughout the night, or like totally sleeping throughout the night, but then it's like this 16 hours of sleep and 4 hours of being like in this weird daze, and then 4 hours of actually being lucid. Right? That's what kind of life is that to live? It wasn't working for me. It was making me more depressed. And all they wanted to do every time, right? I did the year of talk therapy, just like everybody else should probably do, where they told me I was magically healed after a year because they didn't want to give me, that type of level of care anymore. But the one thing they did want to do was constantly push me over to the psychiatrist and tell me, oh, you need the depression medication, you need these SSRIs, you need this, you need that. It was just like, I'm not going to just take all this medication you're trying to get pushed down my throat. And that's when I realized I had to do something different. And there's this book called Acid Tests. The guy's last name is Schroeder. It's Tom Schroeder. And it's not like a super in-depth book. It's not like the original 1977 acid test, right? Like, this book is a functional book about the potential medicinal use of different psychedelics, to some extent cannabis and mushrooms, in the treatment of PTSD, right? And it's about healing yourself and not having to depend on constant medication to get back to what feels like some sort of life that you actually want to live. And that was, to me, like profound. And it talked about all these different underground studies that were done, and these different studies with regards to MDMA that were done, that were manipulated. And like the premise of the book was that like acid, LSD, was like a sledgehammer, right? So it broke off the corners of this rough stone that had formed, and then it broke it off to the point where there was a shape. And then there was the MDMA that came on top of that and provided like the fine detailing of this statue. And then finally, cannabis that comes on top of that, that acts like the rag that polishes it, and that's like your maintenance, right? And it was this whole entire whole health concept of how to use these things to repair yourself. And I didn't want to be on all those medications anymore. So, and I didn't know anybody that sold LSD. I just told you that my whole life I was pretty much a straight edge. So what do? Well, I'm smart enough to figure out how to use the deep web. And I went there and I got myself 3 hits of acid, 3 100 microgram hits of acid, got them in the mail and said, well, it's time to find out. And I popped all 3 of them in, and I went into my backyard and I completely redesigned who I was, what I believed in, what I thought was true and what I thought was a lie, how I felt about my parents, how I felt about my life, where I felt the direction of my life should go, right? It all happened in that moment. And it was in that moment that I knew that I didn't know anything at all. And it was after that I actually got involved in an MDMA study, and I was able to get some medical assistant MDMA studies on top of that, and it did exactly as kind of the book presented. It created definitely a better understanding of where my feelings were coming from. And when you understand why you feel a certain way, you can deconflict what's going on inside you before it becomes completely destructive, right? It's about catching yourself. It's great to have buddies to catch you, but we got to be resilient internally as well. And you can't do that if you don't know what you're looking for. And really, kind of for me, that's what psychedelics did, was it allowed me to look at myself from the outside. And after that, I looked more and more into the cannabis side of it. I started discovering all the magical things CBD was doing, and realized that, cannabis is really presented as this natural medication. And I don't know anything about it. I need to know everything about it. And that's when I really got into learning all of what I know now. And it was before the hemp bill came through, and it was before it was legal. And just like everybody else who needs their weed, I decided I was going to sell it. It
Yeah.
did the same thing as everyone else. And I was happy to do it because I knew that I could reach people who had the same mindset that I had, but I had the ability through word and hopefully soul and heart to change their opinions on it and soften their opinions on it. And that's what I began working on. And I think I was pretty effective at it. And by the time the Farm Bill came through, we knew kind of the direction we wanted to go on the hemp side of it. We definitely embraced all of the hemp cannabinoids. I would have continued selling them if New York State, had allowed for it, but they didn't. Um, and it did help a lot of people. There wasn't a single day when we had our hemp store open, which was in the very, very early days, that we couldn't walk away saying we truly helped somebody's life today. And technically you're not supposed to say anything about the medical benefits of this. I can't tell you what this does. There's a certain level of humanity that when you see somebody in pain and something works for you, there's sort of an obligation to let them know what you're doing, right? And I never
Yeah.
recommended anything that I didn't recommend for myself or wasn't doing for myself. And I think we've kept that going through our product lines today. There's not a single product we carry that didn't have my stamp of approval or design on it in some way or form. But we started our hemp. I tried to become an expert in my trade, and before long we had the opportunity to go into the marijuana side of things, and then we pretty much buckled ourselves up to a rocket ship and have experienced just tremendous growth. And we thank our dispensary partners and all of our customers for that. And I think that we've just had this story that's really kind of resonated with a lot of people. I don't know if we're considered the underdog or what exactly, but I do know that there's not a whole lot of privately held companies that don't have a tremendous amount or any investor support really. We're out there doing the independent thing, and I kind of think like if we can do it, other people can do it, and we certainly try to help as many people as we can figure out how to make this work for them because it's not easy.
No, it's not. You covered on so many great topics there that I wanna take it back just a little bit, and you had talked about how coming off of, active duty, you were prescribed medications, and that's something that I like to bring awareness to all of, my listeners and everything that I do, is the veteran suicide crisis. And the numbers known as like in 22 a day, we know that number to be much higher. And what I think bothers me and drives my mission and purpose so much is that even going into combat, I know so many more of my brothers and sisters that have died from suicide or cancer or addiction than I ever did in combat. And so with everything I do, I want to raise awareness to that, and it's proven that these opioids, these SSRIs, even the PTSD medications causing cancer, the others are causing an increased risk, likelihood of suicide. Other countries are aware of this, and they're prescribing cannabis or hemp as an alternative, but here we're still testing it, and this has been out and around for thousands and thousands of years, and it blows my fricking mind that we want to control it and tax it and make it so gate kept, but alcohol is in every gas station here in the state of Missouri. You can get it at Dollar General, you can get it at Walmart. Um, so thank you for bringing that up about the medications. And then I think it's important you talked about how you started to study cannabis and the using it for good intentions, like paying attention to why it helps you is the reason I wrote the book Strains for Pains in the first place. 'Cause I found there were some strains that actually triggered my anxiety, some that made me tired, some that gave me energy, some that helped with this, some that helped talk to my mom, some that helped me grocery shop, but I had to keep track of it. So I wrote a book, Strains for Pains, to keep track of that, so thank you for bringing that up as well. You started used to pay attention to how it was helping you, and I imagine, that probably assisted you with getting off some of those medications, correct?
I'm not on any medications from the VA, and
Wow.
I haven't been in 7 years. I don't know. It's been a lot of years. It's been a lot of
Well,
years.
that's good.
I
Well, that's
consume
good.
a tremendous amount of marijuana. I think that if anybody saw the amount of cannabis I consumed, they would probably not think I would be able to be functional throughout the day. But I think that you'll find that with anybody that uses cannabis, marijuana specifically medicinally, is that their intake levels are consistently quite a bit higher than what people would expect. Because there's a point where you don't get high anymore, but you still get all the pain relief, and that's really the place that I want to stay. You know, People talk about tolerance breaks. I'm happy with the high tolerance and the no pain. That's to me the gold standard.
So we were talking and you got to the Farm Bill was passed in New York. You were in New York, and at that point in time, you opened up your first business, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I had opened a procurement logistics company where I was able to take kind of what I had been doing and know within the army and kind of flipped it around. And we were doing a lot of state contracts and things like that. And we opened up this hemp shop, and it was in 2019. And we were just starting to kind of get rolling with it. And then the vape crisis happened, and nobody wanted to touch, they don't want to put anything in their lungs. And then COVID was right behind that. Whether the vape crisis was actually COVID, we could debate that all day. But we had to shift everything we were doing from basically have we were still servicing our community, providing the cannabinoids, to like providing PPE for the local community. So we became like this quasi hemp slash PPE shop. It was pretty unique and interesting, um, but yeah, we had consistent customers in our first shop. We did a lot of like trade shows and fairs and things like that. And I think anybody who's trying to get started, we don't know where hemp's going, but any business in general where you're trying to sell an item, that's a great place to start.
Well, that's one thing about hemp that I have to say I'm so proud of is that how grassroots hemp is. With this recent hemp ban, it was snuck in during the government shutdown. There's not a whole lot of backers behind hemp like there is behind marijuana. Marijuana's got some big corporate investment behind it. A lot of alcohol companies, tobacco companies, food industries that have invested back into marijuana. but hemp is really predominantly a grassroots organization, and so for the fact that we raised enough hell to make media that most everybody's heard about this in some way, shape, or form now is good. I believe now it's imperative, though, that we share the information and educate people on exactly what hemp is and how it helps. So that's what brings us together here today. And thank you so much for, for being here again. But anyways, I apologize. I'll let you
Absolutely.
continue on. What's the name
No,
of your
no, no, no. It's,
so
what's that? It's
after
well, Veterans
after
Hemp
this
Market is
okay, go ahead.
Veterans. Yeah, Veterans Hemp Market is the name of the hemp shop, and but we don't. I mean, honestly, it operates at a loss because there's just without any psychoactive hemp products to kind of pay the bills. There's just very low demand for things that people can't immediately feel. CBD and CBG, I can immediately feel it. I think wish more people would try it, but I think there's some people that just still think it's snake oil, and but I don't think we did a good job in the hemp industry of changing that. Maybe that's the good that will come out of this hemp ban at the end of the day. But when we really kind of like look at this hemp ban and we look at all the data around it, and we said, well, what's the definition of hemp? I'm not. I don't even know if we all knew anymore. It all was really becoming really kind of confusing. For operators everywhere. And I know it was tough, like in New York State, because we're trying to abide by the New York State regulations, and at the same time, we had what we considered big hemp. And that's why everything's relative, right? Like you had mentioned, well, there's some big marijuana out there. We felt as small marijuana operators in New York that we were being bullied by big hemp, particularly when it came to beverage, because we were up against these multi-million-dollar lobbying campaigns against the New York legislature to try to get them to change the hemp regulations in New York to allow these like 5 milligram drinks. And we're fighting and paying this ridiculous tax to sell the exact same thing inside a dispensary. And it was just, for us, it wasn't, we didn't feel it was fair. If they're able to do that, we should be able to too. But the minute we do it, we lose our marijuana license. So, it's kind of like for everybody, this had a different effect. At the end of the day, it's a cooling effect that isn't good for anybody, I don't think. Um, but I also wonder why, when you look at the data, there's only, $3 billion or so of USDA hemp harvested, yet we've got a supposed $30 billion industry, right? Like how much illegal marijuana was being pushed into the hemp industry as THCA, this, that, or the other thing. And I think anybody that says that it wasn't happening at all is being naive. And I think somebody who says it was all that is also being naive. But there was
I
clearly
think
yeah, go ahead.
that was a big misinformation right there. You just said there was a lot of I saw a lot of marijuana, like, even McConnell was holding up, some edibles and things that he said were intoxicating hemp, but that was the elite that was marijuana, but it was it wasn't marketed that way. They labeled it as intoxicating marijuana, but it wasn't. Intoxicating hemp, but it was actually marijuana in
Mm-hmm.
the packaging. People just didn't understand the difference. And I think even the verbiage when we say intoxicating, we don't say intoxicating alcohol, we just say alcohol because there's like I'd mentioned earlier, I know a lot of folks that use what they would classify as intoxicating hemp as medicine, and they use it with
Mm-hmm.
intention and safely. They're not using it in teaching school, they're not using it in driving, they're using it for a purpose. And I think when we take that away from people and say you can only buy this type of product at this place where it's taxed, where it's, controlled, we're tracking you, that could later be used against you, Second Amendment rights for one, that's horrible. We want options. We want
Yeah.
anonymity, and I don't see any difference as long as I wanna make sure that it's tested, so quality, I don't want to be
So
included.
I guess you could say that you'd like to see it regulated like alcohol.
I would love to see it regulated, tested, and age gated. I don't want my children be able to go and
Mhm.
purchase it at 16 years old, but at the same time, if I'm an adult and I'm over 21 years of age, I wanna be able to purchase it, and I don't wanna be worried about crossing state lines, and I don't wanna worry about being arrested for having an illegal substance when it's
Mhm.
my medicine. Even my salves, I make a topical salve, like you said, it's out of a CBD isolate, but, um, I sell a full spectrum as well, and just as the amount of THC, which is still a small amount, not enough that even if you melted the whole can to smoke it, gross, you wouldn't feel anything off of that, but that is still too high. So again, like you mentioned earlier, the definitions need to be worked out, but I would love to see it as long as it's tested and age gated, clean and safe. Yes.
Just to just kind of like be the devil's advocate on it, what I think we'd be disingenuous if we didn't point out that we had a money laundering and human trafficking problem that was really cursing the hemp industry. You know, the marijuana industry as well in Oklahoma and California. But if we looked at Maine, they were also having the same problem, and a lot of these were Chinese national-owned farms. With these very low barrier of entry to kind of grow on these permits, and then just kind of like n- you know doing what they're going
Yeah.
to do.
I've seen those in the packaging, no COA on that, and I think that's again, I'm not gonna purchase something because I'm informed on this. I'm not gonna buy a bag of bud that doesn't have a COA on it. I'm not gonna buy from, someone that I can't verify what's in this, you know? I've even bought infused pre-rolls in the past, and I won't name names, but when I looked at the CO, I'm like, "Son of a gun, this is synthetic wax that they use. This isn't even natural. It's not something that I wanna put in my body." But I could find that on the COA. So, I think as long as it's listed and we're adults, we consume responsibly, we purchase responsibly. It's not that I'm not worried about kids going in and buying stuff because adults are gonna go buy it for kids, just like they do alcohol. And that's our job as parents and as adults in society to make sure that we're not participating in that and preventing it.
I think what you're ultimately going to find is that they did not know how to fix the 10 to 15% of the industry that was the problem. And because they can't figure out how to surgically cut it out, they had to use, an axe. But I think there's too much demand for them to simply say, well, we can't allow this. I think they're in the position where they know that regulations have to be developed around it. But then we have to step back and we have to say, okay, wait a minute. If we're going to develop federal regulations around hemp, then we need to stop playing whatever this game is that we're playing and just start calling it all cannabis and stop insulting the plant and go about it that way. And we might find that we could not move forward with that until we had a major change to the way it was currently listed. I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking, and there's no plan at all. But one can hope that we're looking at a national legislation that's going to essentially either move it to Schedule 3 or deschedule it altogether. That is not what the current administration is signaling, specifically with the memo that they just put out talking about how they are going to more aggressively enforce marijuana violations on federal territories, which includes reservations. So I don't know how that's going to work out. But the federal government, in all essence, is signaling that they're looking at tightening controls. And I think that anybody in cannabis, licensed marijuana included, needs to be really concerned about what's going on at the national level right now because, really at the end of the day, we keep talking about alcohol, but the difference between alcohol and marijuana is that alcohol has a constitutional amendment, right? And until marijuana has a constitutional amendment that protects the consumption of it, we're going to be at the whim of whichever political overlord happens to be over us at the time.
And we're not gonna get that until we can show how that's making money like alcohol. how we're controlling the tax of that everywhere. And again, that's got to be controlled.
I got thinking about this the other day. There's what 37 states now that are legal.
I think that's correct.
If the federal government did decide to go the route of pushing pressure on state licensed cannabis markets, how much pressure would it take before you saw a state driven constitutional amendment? In how many states? It takes 2/3 of them, I believe. So weirder things have happened. I don't think anybody could have ever thought that the farm bill and psychoactive hemp was going to be the building bridge or the sacrificial lamb of the budget deal that reopened the government. I don't think that was on anybody's bingo card.
Nobody saw that happening. No, no. Anywho, I want to get back kind of into your business. So you started up your business, you were helping out in the community, and then kind of talk us through what happened next.
Well, we were lucky in being like license number 11 or something like that. So, when the industry first opens, we're a very small team, as startups should be. Then we were very nimble and we knew how to do a few things, but we didn't have a ton of overhead. We didn't have a ton of bills. And we made some really smart, partnerships that kind of showed us the way early on of how to navigate, the sales side of things to some degree until we got a knack for it ourselves. But at the time, we were the one of the only veteran companies that were open, still really are. But also, we were the small, scrappy guy, and I was making carts in the black market. New York Honey was one of the brands that I was running in the black market, so it already had a local following. And the what really kind of like catapulted us though was the moon rocks, the space buds moon rocks, and to this day, like that's been a cornerstone of the products. It's kind of like a symbol of what we're presenting to people is like, okay, accessibility is a big thing for us. We don't think that we should be producing products that our employees can't afford, right? So either we have to reduce the price of our products or increase the what we're paying our employees, or a little bit of both. And the moon rocks were okay. Well, this is what's available in the New York market. We have to be able to make something that people are going to enjoy. And if they're going to be paying $60 for an eighth of flour, we want them to be able to use this to help extend their flour. Or if maybe they've got some flour that's gone stale or whatever, they break off a little piece of that moon rock and they add it to it. And we were able to do it at a price point that ended up being the lowest per milligram THC cost in the whole state for any product that there was. And that just,
Wow.
it just blew up. And it was the door that got us into a whole lot of dispensaries. And then it's kind of like a snowball, right? Like there's the question of, oh, you're in all these dispensaries. Well, the question isn't why am I? The question isn't to the dispensary, why should I carry your product? But it's the question back to the dispensary of why aren't you carrying my product? Right? You see the difference there.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times these dispensary owners would tell us that the products kind of sell themselves, and maybe that's because we're personally testing every batch and we developed all of the formulations in house. Really, I developed all the formulations in house, and these are all things that have worked for me in one way or another. And I'm a firm believer that if you're making something that works for you and that you love and enjoy, you're not nearly as unique as you think you might be. And there's a whole lot of other people that's your tribe out there that you can reach out and find. There's a lot of haters out there, man. There's a lot of haters. And I can't remember who told me this once, but basically they said you can spend all day feeling bad about yourself because you've got all these haters, and you might have, five people who are absolutely in love with you, and everybody else could be a hater. Just focus on those five people that are in love with you because you matter to them. So why would you waste your time with anybody else?
That's so true, and support looks so different, and it's never like, you think it's gonna be, and it wasn't in my case, It's the people that are in here watching the live, those are the folks that are consistent. They continually show up, they try the products, and it's always the people that I don't want to charge. I wanna give them stuff. but they're there, to help, purchase and support and provide feedback every step of the way. But it's not easy, and, that's something I wanna cover from your story because you were talking about how you were going to trade shows and going to stores. You had to hustle, to get
Yeah.
your product out there and to become a local legend like you were with your vapes. That takes a lot of work. That means shows, that means hustling with people. Do you wanna talk a little bit about that work to get it to take off?
I mean, sure. Kind of when I looked at what was being, sold in the area, in the gray market, the black market, whatever we're calling it these days. I saw a lot of, cheap Chinese knockoff, brands this, brand that, and I got thinking like, why why are we building up all these other brands, buying their hardware and their brand names and everything else? And I was like, man, there's nobody just like doing it locally. It's not that complicated. We looked at how to fill carts, started filling the carts and actually putting proper brand on them, getting a COA on them, like doing things in the legal manner in the black market, and it blew people away. They just weren't used to it. They just didn't understand what was going on. It was just at a perfect time that the federal government wasn't really giving, they didn't care too much at the time. They didn't really care, especially around the COVID time, right? Or right before COVID. And in the state really wasn't pushing on it too much either. So it was the perfect timing for it. And yeah, it did take a lot of hustling, but really at the end of the day, in the black market, your product either sells or it doesn't. If you don't have the right price point, you don't really have the right culture, you don't have the right customers, then your product isn't going to move. You don't have the right hustlers, your product isn't going to move. I was not the guy that was out there like selling to individual people or individual stores or whatever else. Like I had a few guys that I cared very deeply for, and they cared for me, and we trusted each other, and we moved a lot of product that way. And you that maybe goes to the point of you have to have a good network around you, right? Like it wasn't just me hustling. Yeah, I was a hustler and I created products that would sell themselves, and I knew the phone calls to make, but that other person on the other side of the phone was a partner of mine, and I built that partnership and I built that trust and I built that network. And that took time, energy. It took making sure that I did what I said I was going to do every single time, right? You control that network. You control how you're perceived in that network. If you always do what you say, and like I had times where I was ripped off. I had times people stole money from me, stole product from me. There was never a single time I went back to somebody who was selling material to me that fronted me something, and I said, "Oh, I can't pay you, man. I don't know what I'm going to do." No. I took a mortgage on the house. I took a loan from somebody else. Whatever I had to do to cover that nut, I did because I knew that if I didn't, that credit line wouldn't be there for me down the road, right? Notice I said credit line because that's really what it takes. It takes a business mentality. I think that's why we're seeing some struggles in New York State because I don't know if everybody who was awarded a license had a tremendous amount of business experience. I think maybe they're catching up now, but it was a steep learning curve, and it's a brutal business. And in the black market was just as brutal as the legal market for different reasons. But in both of them, you're constantly getting potentially ripped off. So you got to protect yourself, protect the network around you. But yeah, hustling hard in the local market, but more so knowing the hustlers to hustle what you need to have hustled. That's a lot of hustles.
That was amazing, and thank you for saying that because it's so important, you have to surround yourself with a good team, a good network, honest people, people who tell you the truth, not what you wanna hear, because you'll never grow if you're just hearing what you want to hear. You've got to lean into that uncomfortable, that unknown to get better. Nobody goes out and shoots a basketball one day and makes it on the NBA. It takes a lot of practice day in and day out, and you've gotta surround yourself with people that know. I don't ask people about business that don't have a business themselves. If they don't know about it, I'm not gonna ask them about it. So it's imperative that you're asking the right people the right questions and surround yourself with the people you aspire to be like, and I absolutely love that. Thank you. I wasn't expecting that amazing philosophy today, but that was I needed to hear that today for sure. Thank you. What else do you wanna talk about, Jason? Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing there in your local community with veterans specifically.
Sure. I think one of the reasons that we've experienced some of the success is goes beyond just, having a great team. It also goes to having, a great mission. And, since I've started this, my wife started this, um, it was a draw to the community that I grew up around, and knowing that the industrial base of this community was essentially gone. Left in the 60s, Gloversville was the glove capital of the world. If you were buying leather gloves, they were probably made in Gloversville, New York. And that crumbled and crashed so fast for these people that they couldn't support the infrastructure that was here because it was built for a population 40% larger. We saw a lot of urban decay, years and years of houses being torn down, government money thrown in only to see the factories build up and move as soon as their tax incentives were gone. Just building a career that you could buy a house and expect to be able to work at for 10 or 15 years just has not been possible here for 50, 60, 70 years. So we have this beautiful city and this beautiful infrastructure, and we have to develop an ecosystem for it to continue to exist. And I believe the very beginnings of that is some sort of industrial base. So if we're going to have an industrial base, it's very hard to break into existing industries. We needed something new. We needed a new industry. We have a new industry. It's cannabis, and we're able to come in here, reopen a 33,000 square foot building that was previously a coating cough syrup manufacturing facility, dropped dead in the middle of the city, and already incubated another company that's in the same building. We've purchased another building in the town next to us, Mayfield, to bring that facility back to life and grow our distribution hubs. And we've managed to employ 65 people that would have never had these sorts of opportunities. We start people at a pay level that you just don't see in other places. And we try to be loyal to our employees, and we ask in turn for their loyalty at the same time. But, we take care of each other. At least that's what we're supposed to do, right? And so far that's worked out for us because the money has stayed in the local community, the stores around the area, the restaurants around the area. They're all getting substantially more money because there's 60 people here that didn't used to be here, and it's continued to expand. With that other company, it's probably closer to 90. It's not going to take long before we see it. We know there's a dispensary coming right across the street. And there's, I think, a micro business that's coming right up the road. So the idea was to create an ecosystem within Gloversville that would be supportive to the cannabis industry. And I think we have proven to the community the asset we can be. They're supportive of it. And now we just have to watch this industry continue to develop Gloversville. And through that, we can start, making sure there's better housing here that people actually want to live in. We can make sure there's better restaurants and stores for people to spend their money on. And this whole ecosystem can continue to develop, and we can regrow a lot of these old communities within New York that really have not been faring well for a very long time.
That's amazing. You're doing so much there. That's such a great idea because there's so many communities I've driven through in my travels that seem like they're run down and they could use life. They've got a complete infrastructure there, and it sounds like you've kind of found that in your hometown and brought life and funds back, by shopping local, adding jobs. That's amazing. That really is.
Yeah, I don't think people quite understand the impact of, shopping with an independent shop owner versus going to like Walmart or some sort of chain supermarket. At the end of the day, there's shareholders that own that. All the profits are taken and sent elsewhere. The community is essentially used as a mine for labor. And I actually think that we require miners to take much better care of the properties they, destroy and have to rebuild than these corporations take care of our employees and our neighbors and our brothers and our sisters. And they use our communities as mines. And it might be 20% more expensive to shop with the guy that's in the middle of that little rundown city, but the reality is 100% of his money stays local. None of that money stays local with Walmart. That means if everybody started shopping local for that 20% extra for those few items you might buy in the city, all of a sudden your taxes are coming down. There's more community goods that are being built up because your tax base, your retail tax base is increased. It works. We just have to stop letting these corporations basically mine our communities for labor and money.
And it gets people back on mission, you know? I've recently purchased some goods from a fellow veteran on TikTok, Fed Up Gear, got some magnesium oil, some bamboo toothbrushes, some natural products, but I know where they were made, I know where they come from, and I feel comfortable using that because I know. I know right where that money's going, I know who that money's gonna support, and I know that the products that they provide are made local, but clean, and that sense of camaraderie that you had talked about when you were in the military, it's something we have a hard time acclimating back to as civilians, and we oftentimes don't keep in touch, or life happens. Life happens. But the more that we talk and the more that we have these types of conversations, the more people are starting to find one another. And I think we're starting to see that we get a lot further when we unite and we come together and we try to find common ground and stop letting so many things divide us, you know? And it goes no different with the communities. We're here to support one another and leave the place better than we found it at the end of the day. I think if we did that, it would be a lot safer. People would feel a lot better, and people would smile more, and they'd be back on a mission. Mission is something else that I feel like is super important for veterans when they leave service. A lot of times it's hard to redefine ourselves, to find our new mission. And I think that when we start making things ourselves and we take pride in that, and that gives us that motivation to be our best self again.
Yeah, absolutely. Purpose is important, and I think that's what we do. We are conflicted about when we get out is about purpose, right? I mean, I can remember it was horrible. I choose not to remember. Finding purpose is important, and it doesn't matter kind of where you find it. You just got to go out and find it somewhere. It could be in doing like running your community garden. You have to have a purpose and a reason, doing something bigger than yourself. I think that's the biggest thing. Is like veterans are all sold on being a soldier or being an airman or a sailor, uh, because they're given the idea that they're part of a bigger mission. It's bigger than themselves. That's the key. And we have to find that same level of bigger than ourselves when we get out in order to kind of find satisfaction, I think.
Amen. I agree. Before we wrap up, is there any advice you would give to our veteran listeners who are on the fence about trying cannabis as a part of their healing or plant medicine in general?
I mean, I think that if you're on the fence, that well, number one, if you're a data-minded individual, just look up the data. That the data is going to speak for itself. And there's enough non psychoactive cannabinoids that will be tremendously beneficial to you that you don't need to worry about THC or getting high, because it's not a question of if those cannabinoids are working. They are working. You have an endocannabinoid system, you have a CB1 and a CB2 receptor. I promise you they're working. If you are looking for more pain and analgesic relief and you're on oxy or whatever crap they've got you on, I think you would be good to find a cannabis doctor and have a conversation with them about how you can begin to dial down your opiates and replace it with something like FICO, or something along those lines. And if all of a sudden tomorrow you stop, if somebody who didn't use opiates tried to take your dose, imagine how they would feel. They wouldn't feel well. It's going to be the same thing. You're going to have to build your doses back up in order for that pain relief to work. But once you get there and that tolerance is built up and that analgesic pain relief kicks in, I think you'll find the mental clarity to be refreshing compared to what you've been experiencing on the opiates.
Thank you. That's great, solid advice. And always start slow, but ask your green doctor wherever you're at in your location. And if you don't have one, feel free to reach out. Jason, what's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you and to find you and your products there in New York?
Sure, you can find us at www.veteranschoicecreations.com. It's www.veteranschoicecreations.com. If you're out there looking for a products and you're a dispensary in New York, it's sales at veteranschoicecreations.com. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great discussion.
Sorry, I'm typing that in here, veteranscreations.com, so I can show it on the screen. Whoop, there we go. Veteranschoicecreations.com.
You got it. Yep.
Right on. Jason, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about you, what you've been through, what you're seeing, and what you're doing in the industry. I'm so grateful again to have this conversation and proud of you for that commitment, putting in that work every day, um, selflessly. I find you talked about it a little bit, but there's so many folks out here that say that they're doing things, but they're not really, and your actions have shown that you really are, and I applaud that, and you showed up early. I don't get that all the time. I do have a lot of requests for interviews, but I love that I'm able to pick and choose them, and I was actually hoping and praying that you would say yes, and you came here, so, again, super thankful. Jason, I'm gonna put you backstage and then close us out, and I'll be right back. Holy smokes. So, Jason, again, thank you for sharing your story. That was amazing. Your battles, your mission with us today. What you're building at Veterans Holding isn't just a company, it's a blueprint for what veteran leadership looks like in the cannabis industry in our own communities. Honestly, after hearing that, that really inspired me. And I will be reaching out to some of my veteran brothers and sisters here in the state of Missouri to see what we can do locally, very similar. But Jason is proof that veterans don't stop serving. We just changed the battlefield. If you want to catch more powerful interviews like this, hit the follow, subscribe, and check out everything that's going on over at 420chief.net. If you want to pick up some salve, check out sunnysideofchief.com. And as always, lead with love,